All right, so we are recording now. Welcome everybody to the March 6th OpenJ9 community call. As we do every week, we'll kick things off by opening things up for any questions from the community or any particular topics that we want to bring up for the community. Given that I see a lot of the usual suspects, there may not be much. So I'll pause for a second here, and otherwise we'll jump into the JIT as a service update from Marius. All right, in that case, Marius, are you able to, I guess I will stop sharing, and then you can share your slides and take over from there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I think I did sharing. Can you see my slides now?
Not yet.
Okay, then something is wrong. How about now? Okay.
Nope.
Okay, I don't know what to do. Okay, maybe now.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay, I hope I can go full screen. Let me see. Yep, I'm full screen now. Okay, so this is going to be an update on the status of the JIT as a service project. So what is JIT as a service anyway? The idea here is to take the JIT compiler, decouple it from the JVM runtime, and make it run in a separate process. So in the end, we would like to treat JIT compilation like any other cloud service. And in doing so, we need to containerize this JIT compiler and manage it intelligently through an orchestrator, which is supposed to provide things like load balancing, affinity, scaling, and reliability. Reliability because if one server dies, another one needs to be resurrected. So why would you want to use JIT as a service in the first place? And there are many advantages to it. First of all, it eliminates the CPU and footprint spikes that are caused by JIT compilation. And in doing so, it provides a better quality of service because now the behavior is much more predictable. The user has an easier task at provisioning resources. It doesn't have to wonder when the JIT will kick in. And also the native out-of-memory instances will be reduced. Also, JIT as a service enables smaller containers, which in turn enables higher application density that provides a lower cost both for the end user and the cloud provider. It also enables a better resource control for compilation because we can scale up and down those resources independent on how many application instances are running. We can also share compiled code across application if we store that AOT code at the server, and in doing so, we amortize the compilation cost across many instances. It also can provide better reliability because in the unlikely event that the JIT compiler will crash, then this doesn't have to bring down the application with it. And we can also use some cross-compilation techniques, the idea here being to use cheap and ubiquitous x86 machines to compile for rare and more expensive ZOS mainframes. So where are we today with it? The source code is already open sourced and it's available in the OpenJ9 repo at the links that I provided. Currently it sits in its own branch, which is called JITaaS. It's not in the master branch, though in the end we want to port this implementation into the master branch. Current implementation is only for Linux x86, but in the future we like to address other platforms as well. It's important to note that the same JVM can take different personas based on the command line options. If you don't provide anything specific, then your OpenJ9 JVM is going to behave normally, but if you specify XX:JITaaS server, then the JVM is going to wait for incoming compilation requests. Whereas if you specify the JITaaS client option, then the JVM is going to redirect those compilation requests towards a server. Currently, we support most of the optimizations that can be performed by OpenJ9, though the bigger pieces that remain to be done are AOT generation and JIT profiling. I should mention that we can do interpreter profiler at the moment, so that's supported. The client and the server communicate over the network using raw sockets and protobufs for serialization, and multiple clients can connect to a single server in parallel. We have encryption support through OpenSSL, though I have to warn you here that enabling encryption will increase the CPU utilization of the client for compilation by 50%, and we are working towards reducing that number. The implementation is stable enough at this point to run the OpenJ9 test suite, and we can also run many enterprise-grade Java EE benchmarks, an example of which we'll see soon. So let's look at some performance graphs. In the examples that follow, all JVMs run in Docker. I have two Linux machines that are connected by an Ethernet cable. The first machine runs the JITaaS server, the Mongo database, and JMeter for applying load, whereas machine number 2 is running the benchmark itself. This is Acme Air, which is a Java EE7 application that simulates an airline reservation system and is running on top of Liberty application server. This slide shows the throughput in Acme Air. If you look at the two lines, the OpenJ9 line and the JIT as a service client line that represent the throughput, those lines are almost overlapping, which means that in JIT as a service, both peak throughput and ramp up is very competitive with the counterparts from OpenJ9. And this is a very good result, especially for ramp up. So it's quite surprising that despite the latency that the network introduces, we are able to achieve such a good ramp up result. And there are probably three different aspects that help with ramp up in this case. The first one is that we have a low latency between the client and the server. As I said, we have just two machines connected to the wire, and the ping latency is under 0.2 millisecond in this case. We can also afford to compile on more compilation threads in the JIT as a service solution because we don't pay the price for compilation. And finally, the JIT as a service solution is allowed to do local compilations and remote compilations to mix and match. The idea here is to perform cheap compilations locally in order to help with ramp up, and expensive compilations should be redirected towards the server to save on CPU and footprint. I would like to stress out that the JIT as a service solution does not preclude us from using other technologies like in-process compilation or AOT. So in our view, JIT as a service should work in conjunction with these other technologies to provide the best behavior for any scenario possible. So look at the memory consumption. OpenJ9 has big spikes in the beginning due to the compilation, while for JIT as a service, those spikes are completely gone, and this is a very good result. Throughput in a small container. So previously, our containers were having 4 CPUs available. In this case, I'm constraining the container to just 1 CPU. So the takeaway from this slide is that we can actually achieve a better ramp up than OpenJ9, which is as a service, because in this case, the application doesn't have to fight for CPU resources with the compiler. Going to an even smaller container, so in this case, I have reduced the memory to just 64 megabyte and only 0.5 CPU per JVM. OpenJ9 starts to falter. As you can see, the throughput is quite low, whereas the JIT as a service solution is achieving a decent amount of throughput. If you are wondering about those downward spikes, these are caused by GC cycles. And finally, this slide shows the behavior of JIT as a service in the cloud. So here we are using IBM Cloud Private, and the Docker containers are rather big, 8 CPUs each. If you look at the throughput, that's top left. Now, the ramp up for JIT as a service is not as good as you've seen in the previous slides. And this is because there is a larger latency between client and server. So these machines are operating in the cloud, and I have no control where they are placed. Probably the network requests have to go through many switches, routers, and so on. So this affects ramp up somewhat. Memory footprint is quite good. Again, the spikes are completely eliminated. Whereas if you look at the CPU usage in top left graph, you can see a big spike for OpenJ9 and a smaller spike for JITaaS service client. Ideally, there should be no spike whatsoever, but communication actually requires CPU. And it was a big surprise for us how much CPU that communication requires. And we had to come with many solutions on reducing that overhead through caching and message coalescing and whatnot, and we still have some work to do in that respect. So what do we plan in the future? First of all, we need to enable AOT code generation at the server. This is needed because AOT is good at reducing CPU and footprint, but only if the shared class cache, which is the repository for the AOT code, is populated. When you start with an empty shared class cache, you still have to pay the price, and JIT as a service can help in that scenario. Also, there is another scenario related to AOT. So JIT as a service can be used to top up the performance of AOT code, which currently stands at 90% of the performance of JIT compiled code. We also plan to do more stress testing, basically see what happens when the server gets killed and then gets resurrected again. We want to implement a versioning scheme, make sure that the client is allowed to connect only to a compatible server. I've already mentioned the next point. We want to port this code to OpenJ9 master, store AOT code at the server, and more work is needed to reduce the communication overhead, especially when encryption is enabled. Now, my final slide, I put here some links for further resources. If you want to know more about the JIT as a service, the source code, the links for the source code also include README files on how to build and how to use it. And down there, I put 4 links to past presentations that may highlight different aspects of JIT as a service. And that's the end of my talk. Have
Thanks,
questions?
Does anyone have any questions? Well, if no one else is going to jump in, I will. You mentioned that JIT as a service is able to interact with the existing AOT code. So if I have a shared classes cache at my client that I've pre-populated and I run it with JIT as a service, is it able to use that cache?
Yes, we made that possible, but now we want to do the additional step of generating the code at the client as well.
Awesome. And so if I want to grab this and try it out, are there details or instructions on how to do that?
Yes. So the links that I showed include instructions on how to build and what you need to do to test it and how to try it out. And there are different ways of building, but one of them is probably not useful for you. So we can build just the JIT, or we can build the entire VM, including the JIT. Okay. Usually here we build just the JIT because it takes less time, but probably outside for the community we'll have to build the entire VM.
Okay. Are there any questions from?
Oh, there are some requirements. So you need to have a protobufs installed on your machine. That's documented on the website, but you need to be aware of that. So protobufs and SSL need to be installed at the development branch for those.
Okay.
Are you able to translate the results that you're getting into anything that someone might recognize as a financial gain? So if you were running in the environment with JIT as a service for an application in this kind of environment, you'd be paying this much versus another amount if you weren't running with JIT as a service. I think that might be a bit more meaningful to consumers.
So it depends on how you want to monetize this. So if the cloud provider is willing to absorb the cost of running those servers, then the user will see a cost benefit for sure. And you may also get additional savings from the fact that you may have a higher density of clients, because you don't have to have the same number of servers as the number of client machines. Right? With just a few servers, you can serve many, many clients. And those clients, the memory requirements for those clients could be lesser.
Yep, thanks.
Do we have a nightly test run going on to run testing against this?
No,
At the
that's
moment, no.
point for us.
I guess we probably should get one.
Yes.
Especially given, I like that you have included stress testing in the set of items to come up. I can think of a few scenarios that
yes, there is an item that is open that is a prerequisite of enabling testing. I've communicated this to Daryl, and he will do a follow-up. But once that is enabled, we probably could be able to do testing as well. So right now, all our testing is done locally.
Yeah,
we make sure
we added the JIT as a service flag in the test framework,
right?
So you are able to, and it actually makes me think that we should probably just turn on a nightly run of the tests against it.
Right. Our goal is actually to have the Jenkins testing. Once you put pull some code, something needs to be triggered automatically to test that code. And
right. So, and I guess it only matters when we have a fresh build available, and that's, I think, why we decided not to have a nightly Jenkins run at the moment, because there's not a nightly build out of that branch. Or is there?
Correct, but as I said, there is a prerequisite. So Adam needs to.
Fair enough. Okay, that's good. It's nice. Thanks for the demo or for the presentation.
Okay, you're welcome.
There's a prerequisite for the pull request, but I think we should be able to turn on nightly unless there's something else I'm missing. I don't think we'd have the resources to do it outside, but we could do it inside for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, it'd be worthwhile. I want to also turn on AOT nightlies internally, so we could take that offline. And
so if anyone has, I guess, wants to learn more about JIT as a service, or just ask questions to the people who are working on it, I think the best way would be to reach out on the general Slack channel in the OpenJ9 instance. And if we start getting a lot of traffic there, then and maybe even if not, it's probably worthwhile having us create a channel dedicated to the JIT as a service work, so we can have more discussion around this in the open.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And maybe have another one of these presentations in a month or two, just on any updates that have happened in the meantime.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, then I will share the agenda again, and we'll. All right. So one of the things we always do at this point is take a look at the more recent user-raised issues. So I will.
Unfortunately, we're in the same.
I'll pull that link up. And we can take a look at things that may have been raised since the last one of these. So I see there's a new issue on the Java VM vendor getting overridden. This is targeted to the 0.13 release. Does anyone have details on this? Okay, it looks like it's being actively worked. Good.
Yeah, and this is in terms of how we noticed is We've turned on auto detect for the testing. So we look at system properties to determine information about the binary under test. And in 8 and 11, VM vendor was Eclipse OpenJ9, and starting in 12, it shows up differently. So our testing at the moment at Adopt on JDK 12 won't run with auto detect on because of this. I've switched them temporarily to not use auto detect, but I'd like to turn it back on once this is corrected.
So basically, Adopt is setting the Java vendor to adopt OpenJDK rather than Eclipse OpenJ9, and there's going to be a number of places that are going to have to be updated to accommodate that.
Yeah, so there is a kind of discussion going on in the parallel issue at Adopt OpenJDK. So I'd encourage anyone on this call who has opinions about this, but my feeling is that the vendor should be since vendor goes back to the days when we didn't give software away, but the vendor should be equivalent to the builder or distributor in my mind, and the VM vendor should be the supplier of the VM. And that's what seems to be being done by all the other suppliers of JDKs, and the anomaly at the moment seems to be actually JDK 11 for Eclipse OpenJ9, where we say for JDK 11 OpenJ9, where we have this Java vendor set to Eclipse OpenJ9. Now that's been corrected, for want of a better word, in JDK 12, hence this problem being exposed. But it may be that we should have some follow-on work to make JDK 11 look like JDK 12 if everyone's in agreement that the Java vendor should in fact be adopted on JDK.
Yeah, 8 and 11.
8 as well, right? Yeah, I hadn't looked at it.
Also, if you look at the change that I referenced in that issue, it looks like the JDK 12 specific code that was added. I think it's trying to default the VM vendor to the vendor, which doesn't seem quite right.
Yeah, we'll have to take a look at what that code is doing.
So we could fix this code to hard code Eclipse OpenJ9 or something, and then looks like there's a test that would have to be fixed, and then as Shelley mentioned, the auto detect would probably have to be fixed as well.
We have a update already, a PR ready for auto detect, but I've said hold off until we decide how this resolves. So yeah. And the test you're referring to is an OpenJDK regression test, and I believe it's been fixed. Volker fixed it for 11, but it's not been backported to 8, and I'm not sure. I suppose then if it's fixed in 11, it should be fixed for 12.
Yeah, actually, I was referring to, it's a helper class called support exec, which looks at the Java vendor and looks for IBM.
It's one of our functional tests that need to be fixed. Okay.
Yeah, well, it could be a number of functional tests, whatever uses this helper.
Yeah.
I think we need to change it to look for Java VM vendor, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The next issue here is the asserting in the balanced GC policy. Just want to make sure that the right people are aware of this. All right. So we've got some fair bit of debug information in here. Okay, good. It is being looked at. The next one here, this ROM classes in Java 11 not being stored. Do we have an update on that? Pete, I'm kind of looking at you. I'm hoping that you may have an update.
Something to do with alignment. So Hung's looking at it.
Okay. And then there's another issue with the version string in Java 11 here. Someone's correctly pointed out that we're missing some of the tag information here in our version strings. And I've been digging for that code in the background and haven't found the right place yet to find out where we're missing the information. So if anyone has more knowledge on where that is and wants to stick a link in, that would be appreciated.
There's some code in the extensions repo that looks for a get tag and then sets variables to that value that get used by OpenJ9 for the Linux version.
Can you click on it? I'm not sure what's actually missing.
Where it says JDK based on.
Yeah. So here we're missing the piece that goes in there that tells us what the.
Okay. That's a bit
So
I don't think that's a recurring problem. That's on Mac, isn't it?
We've had this in the past where Adopt wasn't cloning the full repo, or where we've had issues with duplicate tags.
I think I downloaded Linux and it had the right tag.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's a Mac only issue because.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've done Windows locally as well, and that was right. I certainly didn't spot it was wrong. I'm running it while we're talking.
Okay.
So it looks like it might be Mac.
All right, so I just got the warning that we're down to our last 10 minutes. So I'm going to jump back to the agenda here and jump into our discussion around the 0.13 release that's very quickly approaching. Do we have an update on whether we got a milestone 1 build up for March 5th? I'm guessing from the silence that we may not have done that.
Sorry, I'm looking for a button to click. Unmute. No, we've got the nightly builds running for all platforms except Mac OS, where the Adopt Home JDK project needs a later operating system that they're working on. But I believe we're pretty close to putting in the branches in place to start doing the milestone builds that we were hoping for.
Okay, branches. Do we have an ETA on when the branches will be available?
Which branches are we talking about? Because all the branches are created already. The extensions JDK 12 branches created and the OpenJ9 branches are there.
Okay, so we need to just kick off a build.
Yeah, I think we're at that point.
So what we didn't do is tag OpenJ9 branches with a milestone 1 tag. We figured we'll just build from that branch.
Okay. That seems reasonable. It does mean we won't have an exact, well, we'll have the SHAs, so we can get back to it.
Yeah, we have the SHAs, and I could always create a tag on those SHAs. Whatever gets built, I could create a tag on those SHAs after the fact.
Okay.
The build itself won't identify in the minus version as milestone 1, but I don't think it matters.
Okay. So based on what we've just said, I'm going to assume that the changes to the build scripts have been merged at Adopt.
Yeah, all the problems we know about so far have been dealt with. Yep.
Okay. The infrastructure issues, well, we mentioned that we're down to just problems on Mac. The X11 prereqs required, have they been applied everywhere?
I think they were applied manually rather than properly, if you like, through the Ansible scripts to get us going. So I think there is something not quite right with the Ansible executions on System 390 and PPCLE Linux.
And has the AIX machine received whatever help it needs?
It was resuscitated, but I think it's sick again as of early this afternoon. The key's running out of disk space. I don't have the details as to why that would be the case. But
I think it's fundamentally because we're running a RAM drive, and basically the JDK 12 is large, so it's running out. So we need to look into a better way of clearing that out.
Is there any outlook for getting a JDK 12 radio button for the nightly builds?
Well, I raised an issue for that today in the website repo. I'm not sure anyone's picked it up yet, though. It's not something I've done before myself.
Okay. We're down to our last 5 minutes. So is there anything else on the upcoming release that we need to touch on?
Is Adopt building without OpenSSL bundling for Linux?
We haven't changed anything as far as I know, so it's still will be bundling.
Sorry, no, I changed the build parameters to not bundle on Linux, but bundle on Mac and Windows. But of course, we don't do anything on Windows yet. On Mac, yeah.
And then the other change that we would need is to turn on building OpenSSL support for AIX. We wouldn't bundle on AIX, but with OpenSSL support built for AIX, it should be working.
Yeah, so all I noticed was that all of that kind of code was commented out for AIX, and I didn't do anything to alter that yet.
So I could send you the parameters that need to be added, or they're probably already there commented out.
Mm-hmm. I'll have a look at it versus the Linux if we want it to look like that, essentially. So there is a question though about when. So the same code now is being put into 11 and 8 for the next quarterly update. So we need a position on whether or not we are going to change what is currently the default behavior for those to not bundle.
Yeah, you can change 11 to be the same as 12, and then 8, we need the extensions code to be delivered.
So as long as we're happy that people aren't already relying on the old behavior, that would be the case. I thought that's what I wanted to at least consider before we did that.
I think this is a good point to make this change. We've only bundled for one release at this point, and so one release. And so I think we're still in a good spot to make that change.
I wonder if we need something more prominent in the docs, like a prerequisites page that says if you're going to use OpenJ9, here are the prereqs you should have installed. And then we can list OpenSSL as a prereq on Linux. Because now it kind of requires, we're hoping that many people will already have OpenSSL installed, but if they don't, it may not be obvious from the docs that they need to install it.
Yeah, let us think about that, Peter.
Should also make it very clear in the release notes that that is changing for this release.
Yeah, and maybe add some trace points or other data to make it easy to tell for anything that might be listening to it, whether that's Health Center or other tools in the future. Okay. we're down to the last sort of 2 minutes. So is there any last or any other business that people want to call attention to? All right. Then I will call it because we're down to less than a minute. Thank you, everybody, for the call, and we'll talk again next week.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye.
Thanks, Dan.